Yeah, well, you know, that's like just your opinion, man.
Hello and welcome to the Audio Opinion Show, where really too many opinionated people tonight are going to talk about their particular opinions about audio things we think. It's been a significant amount of time since last we met, so
And I've
welcome
missed
back.
this, Brian.
And it's been, it's it's a fun thing. It's a fun
It
thing
is.
that we like to do. So all of these faces are familiar faces. Every single person here I've talked to at length, or done gigs with, or been in battle with, or lots of other things. So I appreciate
Blocked on
everybody.
Facebook.
Yes. Yes, argued about things on Facebook, whatever. So, welcome back to everybody. Since we got lots of folks, let's just dive right in. So, we do the thing that we always do, which is we launch a poll and we ask the most important question. And the most important question tonight is, which movie should never be remade? Which movie should never be remade? Option number 1, The Princess Bride. Option number 2, Roadhouse. Option number 3, also The Princess Bride. Option number 4, you keep using the word remake. I do not think it means what you think it means. And option number 5, all of the above. Or you can also, if you want to vote with a visible hand, you can vote Wallace Shawn. Because I forgot the Wallace Shawn. So I know Mac wants to vote Wallace Shawn. So yes, the first option is The Princess Bride. Second option, Roadhouse. They're talking about remaking this. I'm not kidding. Option 3, The Princess Bride. Option 4, you keep using the word remake. I do not think it means what you think it means. And option 5, all of the above. Option hand, Wallace Shawn. And so we will. Wow, people still voting. We will end the poll because y'all had enough time. And we will share the results, and everyone did. It looks like we answered the right thing, which is all of the above, including the hand for Wallace Shawn. Like, that's absolutely correct. But the Roadhouse, really? Like, why?
Is there,
why would you?
Is there somebody thinking of doing this?
Yes,
and
yes.
they're hiring Jake Gyllenhaal to play.
No.
Yeah. That's the first thing I said too, was no.
I mean, there's two different approaches to why this should never happen. Approach number 1 is it's a really god awful movie, so why would you make it again? But also, number 2 is it's also a cult classic of bad. You can't remake cult class. You can't. You just they have to be it has to be Patrick Swayze kicking people in the face. Like, that's what the movie has to be.
Well, and Sam, how do you replace
right.
Sam in that? Come on.
Anyway,
But it could be worse. They could make it worse.
That's what he's afraid of.
But that's just it.
There might be a little value in that.
Well, the thing is, it's like, if you make it worse, then it's just really, really, really bad. But if you make it better, then it's not interesting.
No.
It's a lose-lose. I don't
It
really
is
understand.
a lose-lose. I agree.
All right, so let's figure out what we're going to actually talk about other than Roadhouse, which had a interesting soundtrack and good sound design, so that's relevant. So we're doing something a little bit different tonight, which is our topic is going to be picked by one of our panelists. The panelists that are available for us are the 6 that were in the earliest. So, but we all get to vote. We all get to vote. So you can vote for yourself, you can vote for someone else. So our options for a person to pick our topic are Fred, Clive, Aram, Mac, Michael, not Mike, or Greg. So we have Fred, Clive, Aram, Mac, or Michael, or Greg. Only 7 people have voted, and there's more than 7 people here. I can't.
We don't
vote,
even get to
but
hear what the
everyone else
topics are
can.
before we vote.
Oh no, it's a surprise.
No, that's the. So
Surprise,
we're voting on who we trust.
And I
Who do
voted
you
11
trust?
times.
Oh God.
Who do
voted
you
11
trust?
times.
Well, just keep voting. Just keep voting, Lipnick. Just keep doing it. Just more voting from you will be fine. Okay, I think we have a quorum. It was very close. I'm going to share the results. And the result is with five votes, Greg Kurta. Am I saying your last name right? Kurta?
I'm just not that
Kurdi?
interesting, you guys.
Kurda? Well,
Yeah.
I mean, basically, I'll stop sharing. Greg is going to pick our topic. I'll give him a second to digest that thought, because Greg, Greg, have you ever been on our show before? I feel like you have not.
Once.
Well, a while ago.
Once,
but,
yeah,
But
a while
so Greg is sort of is has not here often. He is, as you can tell by looking at him, a very interesting character, and he lives in a foreign country to most of us here, other than our Canadian friends. He doesn't even live in North America. Did you know that there were countries that weren't in North America? Apparently, this is
Who
true.
knew?
Oh,
So-
sure do. I just traveled through most of them, it feels like.
And you didn't visit Greg once, which was
Not
really
at all.
really rude.
You know-
Anyway, go ahead, Greg. You have the
I was
floor.
gonna say,
What
in-
we're going to talk about.
Well, in fact, when I moved here, people asked me. I said I was moving to Norway, and I had friends in the U.S. that were asking me what state that was in.
What?
Never underestimate the stupidity of the average American.
What state is it in?
Well, actually, there's towns called Norway in several states. So it turns out it was probably a legitimate question.
It's in a state of
One here in
disrepair.
South Carolina.
Yeah.
Where
Okay.
in Norway are you?
I am about a third of the way up the country in just a little north of a town called Trondheim. It's actually like the third biggest town, I think, in Norway.
I've been there.
Have you?
Can't say I remember it specifically, but
Yeah,
I mean,
I've
was
been there
Clive.
too.
Yeah, I teach at the university, and it's kind of a university farm town, the exact place that I'm in, but it's pretty.
So
I
you just
driven
still
through it.
lockdown?
Oh God, no. No, we've been out of everything for a long time. So it's good, and people are getting COVID left and right, all the time, and they're down for a couple of days and they're back up, and it's like, never mind.
Yeah, and away we go. Well, Professor Greg, what are we gonna talk about that has anything remotely to do with anything you care about this evening?
I don't know exactly what the full what branches of sound everybody is in.
It's
but I
part
can-
of the
I can-
fun.
It's all over
So
the
just
place.
wing it.
Yeah.
Just throw something out.
Yeah,
So,
I think we have it completely covered, honestly, looking at this group.
Okay. So what I would like to discuss is I'd like to discuss new school versus old school techniques. Do they work? Do we like them? In a variety of venues. I mean, at first my first thought was live, because there are some things about live that really that current live sound that really bug me. Such as insane amounts of kick drum in the subs. What is up with that?
What,
You can
what
thank
is-
rap for that.
Huh?
Rap and hip hop for that.
Yeah. Well,
Well, yeah,
but
but-
it's everything. It is everything.
It's
I mean, Greg
everything.
Greg is right. It's except for Clive's mixes. Clive's are perfect, but other than that, but no, it is, but it's funny
Well, you hear
because
it, Brian. You hear it in the recordings.
yeah.
Is
And
that way?
that's-
Is that way in the recordings?
No.
you
It's a thing now. I mean, it used to be that the kick was more click than it was, than it was thump, and the click, led the way for the bass to carry the rest of the low end. Okay. In other words, the kick drum was the attack that the bass would carry through. That was always my understanding.
you feel like
And I mean, it's
audience
just-
driven, or do you feel like it's a soundman's decision? Do you feel like the audience wants that?
I don't know.
Is it the audience
I can't imagine this kick drum pounding you in the chest. What's the point?
Because
It-
it depends,
it-
I
depends on
think
the
the
level of
physicality is really important for lots of different kinds of music, and that's really what it is. It's a very physical thing,
Yeah.
and it's also a musical style. I mean,
Okay.
I think in the 70s, a lot of people in high-end thing, without a lot of bottom end. Now it's gone the other way. There's certainly the style of a lot of different kinds of music has tremendous amount of low end. In fact, what surprises me and actually impresses me is how much low end people can actually record on tracks and make it sound good. Some of those recordings are pretty stunning.
Which then goes to, so here's an interesting swerve, because how much of recording mixes in the 70s, specifically in early 80s, do you think were directly, how do I say this? Basically, vinyl had trouble doing a ton of low end and a ton of attack. I mean, that's where I'm trying to go with this. And so how much do you think, like, the style of music was driven by the technology, that now the technology has changed because, digital, we can, take your head off at 37 hertz. If the PA will do it, like, we can do that. And how much is that then is like, oh, now that we can do it. And then, the further question is it a reaction to the fact that we didn't have, I'll cut off with this. I was listening to Boston's first record on the airplane, going from place to place somewhere recently, and was just kind of floored by the mix. Like, because there's so little low end and so little kick drum. It's
so much air in
super
that.
bright and super. Now I'm not criticizing, but I was just like, I didn't even
Very different.
remember how different it was because I experienced it, and then but I had my good in-ears in, so I'm listening to a good reference, and I mean ish, and I was like, man, there is like no low end in this, and it's a snare solo. Like the snare was like right here, like right between my eyes, there is snare. And it's like I could hear each individual snare rattling, but the kick is like way off, like it's there. And it was just interesting. It's like how much of that was a result of that's the sound that Tom Schultz wanted to get, and how much of that was a result of the technology available at the time.
100%, because Tom is still that way to this day. He won't let a front of house guy put anything that we would call decent amount of low end in the system. He won't let him do it.
Doesn't like it.
And I think conversely, that's almost just as much of a problem as too much of it. Not saying that one's better than the other. I think it's kind of a problem because it's like, as someone who's been doing a lot of cooking over COVID, over lockdown, it's like it's one of the key ingredients. Like sugar is a perfect example. If you put sugar, even in a pizza, there's sugar. If you put a pinch of it, it balances out the acidity, the acid-like qualities that the tomato paste will have. But it's kind of conversely that idea of like no low end. I'm like, but then if you don't want to have low end, don't have your bass player or your kick drum even on there. But I think kind of to get back to the point Greg was kind of saying, I think it also has to do with the music you grew up with. Now, I'm not saying, X genre of music you listen to grew up meant, okay, you're going to mix like this. I'm an interesting, I think it might have started with mixers, especially when you got to the 90s and like the aughts, where you had techno, or as the young kids these days call it, EDM, is incredibly low end, incredible. Like the kick, you listen to a Skrillex song, it's that kick is what will drive it. And same thing with hip hop. Now, I grew up in a very diverse musical. In fact, to me, one of my favorite records, especially sound wise, was an album by Queens of Stone Age called Songs for the Deaf. And it was one of those albums where you could hear every single instrument very clearly. Sometimes you had to listen carefully, but it was designed for this balanced mix. And I always kind of shoot for that. Now, I believe it's also within the genre too. It's like, if you're doing an R&B hip hop band, you definitely want more low end there because that's what drives the music. While rock band, the kick is less about the thump and more about the attack. So and because I'm mixing for a world music band that And I usually also have the idea of like, which is I think more of an old school thing of of this great thing called dynamics, where certain songs the band plays, the kick is kind of the star because it's what drives it, while others, are sax players the leader. So I think it's also just less old school, new school, and also understanding what music you are mixing.
Well, you mentioned this word dynamics. You keep using that word. I do not think we mean what we think it means or something.
Very, very funny, Ryan. Very funny. The loudest
Broughton.
war needs to end.
Yeah.
I was going to say that and at a certain level, people assume that the sound man is the side of this. There's very commonly you'll have the musical director or the manager or somebody else saying, "This is what we want." You go listen to their album, and perhaps that's what they want, but they may want something louder, they may want something harsher, they may want something that appeals to them. And a lot of times the sound engineer is just doing what he's been paid to do. There are, of course, lots of times where the person in front of house has the carte blanche to do what they need to do, and they'll do something that the artist likes. But there are many other times, Prince and other people are good examples of this. They say, "This is what I want. You do it or you're fired. I'll get somebody else who will do what I want." And maybe that's not pleasant to the audience, but that's what the artist wants, and that's what they're paying you for.
Yeah, Greg.
Yeah. Okay. So this brings up another corollary to that. I mean, I'm sure you guys are all aware of this current trend in motion pictures of making the dialogue totally unintelligible.
Right.
Okay.
Good point. Very good point.
We love that. And I know most of the film mixers still in LA, and this is making them crazy. They're trying to get their names off the pictures, but they can't.
Is it because of the surround sound?
No. These are basically directorial decisions, and some concept that mumbly dialogue is more emotional.
Yeah,
Yeah,
bring people in, you lean in.
Well, that goes for singing on lots of tracks on the radio.
So then my question is, and so this might apply also to the to live. Do you think that the mixers are unhappy about some of these things that they're made to do?
Each situation will be different, I'm sure.
On Robert's show on Tuesday, there's a guy, his name's Morton. I think he's from Norway. And he was on the show, and he's been out with one of those mega rock tours. And he said that there was a show recently where the warm-up band or whatever, there was just so much low end that he physically got ill at front of house. And it was just vibrating him so bad that he had to leave the building. And he was just like, you're gonna hurt people at some point, especially if you're bringing younger audiences in and you're throwing that kind of volume at them. And I said, well, what kind of sound pressure will do? And he goes, well, he was maybe hitting 107 or so. I go, was that real or was that A-weighted? And he goes, it probably was A-weighted because the guy was not. It was when your vision is impacted by what's coming off the PA system, it's just too loud.
Or another one I feel is, to me, the person has failed as a sound mixer is when people are plugging their ears and leaving the venue, even if the band's playing great. I feel, period, you should be stripped of your title as sound engineer. Like one or two people is fine because there's always going to be people who are more sensitive. But if it's a continuous thing throughout the show, which I've seen,
it's kind of a no-brainer. It's like if you're chasing people out of the room, you've definitely done something wrong. Lipnick, what do you want to add?
Well, Scott Vogel mentioned earlier Queens of the Stone Age, and I took my wife to go see Them Crooked Vultures when that first album came out, and I brought earplugs, fortunately, because without them, there was so much low end that I think what was going on, I'm not totally clear on the physics of this, but I think like my eardrums were compressing, so I wasn't hearing the mids and highs. It was just all low end, and it was terrible. and we put our earplugs in, and then we could enjoy the show because it got rid of that thing. But I think that's what goes on. If there's so much low end coming at you, I got to think that your eardrums or whatever is in there just compress and don't
Well,
move.
it's low end masking is what happens.
But there's
low
something
end
physiological
masks.
going on too.
Yeah.
And because with the
Well, that's
earplugs, it helped.
That's what he's saying. It's a low end masking. The low end is masking
thing, right?
everything else. Yeah.
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 I mean, both things are going on.
Speaking strictly for myself, I've got to have balance. It's got to everything's got to be in balance with each other. Or I'm not happy. I don't feel like the audience is happy. It just, it just doesn't work. It's got to be balanced.
Yeah, I always, whenever I mix anything that's beyond a singer songwriter with, person with a guitar and voice, my own test for how it should sound, at least to me, is like, can I hear every instrument or person singing on stage right now? If the answer is no, I'm failing.
Yeah.
Well, then you have the other side of it. Like we have a problem here in Arizona, and I know they have a problem in Vegas, where you go to an NBA game or something inside of a building, and you have 10-year-olds that are coming in with earmuffs that you use at a shooting range. Why are you going to a sporting event and having to wear that kind of hearing protection? Makes no sense.
Well, and
Actually,
it's
there
it's
is
getting
an
it's getting the PA over top of the and then trying to make it an impactful. Pete, well, you were
Real quick to respond to Fred. I think the NBA might be the only, and I could be corrected on this, but I do know for sure they have like a 92 dBA limit for games for the PA system.
Not in Arizona, they don't. Trust me.
For the NBA, it's actually like a pretty strict rule, and the teams get fined if they're caught. Like,
Well, they must be paying lots of money. And then in Vegas, go up there for a hockey event. Go to a Golden Knights game someday and try to hear after the game.
Well,
But-
Well, hockey games seem to be like that.
Hockey games are almost worse than NBA as far as, because I'm in the sporting industry, and I can't sometimes even hear my announcers. I can't open any ice mics, and I can barely hear my announcers.
But is it the PA or the crowd?
the
at the
PA?
sporting event? The PA.
yeah, it's the announcer
PA,
over
the
top
music,
of everything. Yeah,
the
yeah.
thump,
All
the,
that. Okay.
you know,
All right.
all of that.
Yeah, I sat in the mixers booth and heard directors screaming for more level on the ice, and we're metering 105, 107 dB, and the system is
just
basically
freaking horrifying.
maxed out. It's horrible.
Like that's horrifying. Like I go to the Savannah Bananas baseball games here in Savannah, which if you've been on social media, the Savannah Bananas are awesome. If you haven't, look them up. They're fun, but it's a like a minor leaguey kind of thing. And they do all like the PA never shuts up the entire game, and it's part of the party. It's fine, but I have earplugs in the whole freaking time. One, it's distorted as hell because it's a cheap old stadium, and so it's not a great PA system, and it's too damn loud. Like my ears will be ringing for days if I don't put earplugs in to go to a minor league baseball game. And I don't know if there's a normalization of that, like volume equals energy or just, I guess, but between it being a relatively cheap PA and a metal 1940s era metal roof stadium enclosed, it's a cool stadium. Like it's so much fun, but man, does it sound terrible. Jeff, you've had your hand up for a while. What's up, man?
When all else fails, people think louder's better.
Yep. Yeah.
So
No,
just,
there's
if you can't do anything else, turn it up.
To kind of piggyback off of what Fred and Brian said, it's like with the sports arenas, sometimes it's even with a good PA, it's hard because I don't know those ones you've mentioned, but personally, from my experience, there's a venue up here. I say up here because I have to go all the way up to Canada. For those who don't know, I live in Vermont, so the closest, like where I can see all the big, huge touring acts, is a place called the Montreal Bell Center. For those who don't know, it's a hockey rink, and I've seen bands like Megadeth, Velvet Revolver, Foo Fighters. So you had already within those three a huge variety of sound mixers and sound. All the bands played great, and The only one that sounded really good when I went to the Bell Center was Leonard Cohen on his last tour before he passed away. And I think I found out who that mixer was. I unfortunately am spacing on his name, but I looked through his history and I was like, oh, okay, that guy's really good. But it was just how challenging of a space that is. Now, I don't know if it was his mixing combined with also the fact that Leonard's band was like, a lot of instruments were either pure electric, like the drummer was on one of those electric acoustic hybrid sets, and most of the instruments were either closed mic'd or were, an electric bass. So there's nothing stupid loud on stage, but it was also just the way a million other things. So those rooms in general are not really good sounding rooms. So no matter who, even if you have the best mixer ever, they're going to have a challenge being in that space, because there's no, people who design sports arenas aren't going, man, how do I make it so a concert's going to sound good in here?
I've never heard
I
a
have to
concert
imagine
sound
the
good in an
audience.
arena. It's usually outdoors. That's the only place where I find I really enjoy the sound. I've never enjoyed the sound in an arena. It's just way too much reverberation and
or
slap back and whatever.
mid-cap theaters like 1,200, 1,400
Small.
seat theaters.
Smaller the better.
Are
club.
great.
Club. I've heard some of the best sounds I've ever heard in my life in clubs. But
I mean, clubs, the stage volume can sometimes knock you over, and that ruins it a little bit. But no, I agree. I mean, the best sound I've ever heard was Hootie and the Blowfish outside through a D&B rig, through an XL4. Glorious.
Yeah,
absolutely impeccable, just freaking amazing. But yeah, it was like I can hear you cutting 0.01 dB out of the kick drum at 3K. Like, there's nothing in the way. I'm hearing these well-tuned speakers that you are with many years of experience with this band, like, dialing in meticulously. And I'm getting that, arenas are
they're for sports. They're designed to make things louder, designed to make the audience cheering louder. It's the exact opposite of what you want for concerts.
Well, and Aram, this is a pick on you thing, because I also think about symphony halls and those little concert hall little and big concert hall spaces, which are also, they're designed to be reverberant and have a live sound and all this stuff. And I know that you're doing some sound reinforcement in those, and I know you're also doing recording in those. And speak to the challenge of that.
Yeah, it's two different goals a lot of the time, because you end up with a hall that's meant to carry and sound acoustically really nice, but here you are throwing a bunch of noisy stuff in there, and you want to throw it through the PA, and not it's a challenge just to tame all that, and it's also really a challenge to get it all to sit right, especially when you have the ensemble is on the deck somewhere, and then the PA for coverage purposes is like way up here, and now there's no logical way to make it sound organic. So it's definitely a struggle. The one thing that I actually thought of vaguely related along those lines in terms of what we want to hear and whether or not the technology has been in the way of what we want to hear. I remembered it came up recently, but I was reminded of there is a concept that was pioneered by a concert band composer and arranger, W. Francis Macbeth, and it became very popular within like the music education side of things, called the pyramid of sound, where your lower register instruments, you need more of them, and you build a more solid base, and then as you work your way up the pyramid, you need a lot fewer piccolos to make the things happen. And part of me wonders if, like, all right, at least and this is the big asterisk, is in Western music, let's say traditional Western music, that if that's what's been in vogue for a while, then I think it's very possible that it's, with exceptions, aesthetic exceptions, but for the most part, for a while it was like, well, there wasn't as much bass because there couldn't be, because the technology was in the way.
The other problem is that video right now is king. Audio is secondary at shows. So
Yep.
like he said, you got these speaker systems that are way up here because you can't block the video screens. So that becomes a big challenge for live stuff.
Well, and screens are getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, and that's a concert thing, that's a sports thing, that's an everything thing. Not that we're bitter, but y'all need to back off a little bit.
I'm bitter.
Yeah, give us a little bit. Give us a little. I mean, I do. I remember. I mean, my whole career doing corporate. It was always sightlines, but it has absolutely gotten worse because it used to be, sightlines to the stage and sightlines to the maybe reasonable sized off-screen screens, and now it's like sightlines to the entire upstage wall of LED that extends all the way to the ceiling and all the way to the walls of the build. And you're like, you can't block any of that. It's like, well, I put in-ears in everybody's? I don't know what to.
It sounds like Michael Hotop must have designed that.
For instance, but it's Fred, you said something and now I forgot what I was going to say. Oh, I think it was before Fred. I think it was Aaron said this, because this was another like big, you want to talk about a big swerve or a big, like a whole nother thing, is we all talk about music like there's only one kind of music. And 99.9% of the time we're talking about Western music. That's what we're talking about. And, our Eurocentric, America-centric, like what we think of as, and there's a whole nother, majority of music in the world is not in that genre. And it's a whole different set of frequency expectations and sound expectations. I mean, I've done a ton of Indian music. I've done a ton of Middle Eastern music, and almost always the freaking compression horns are driving a spike through the middle of my head. And that's what it sounds like. And
how long does it take you to get that out of your head after?
Oh man, there's still a dent.
It takes me like 2 weeks.
And then, I also thought of something else, which is how much of audience expectation has been, I mean, we mentioned it with vinyl, but also with just playback systems. Like, the typical, I remember what my home stereo was when I was, in the early 80s. And unless you had a bunch of pile of money, that thing wasn't going below 80. Like, it just wasn't doing anything down there, period. It just wasn't. Your car speakers were 6x9 ovals with a, coaxial thing in them. And they, again, not a lot of low end going in and not a lot of ultra highs going on either. And so then that's like when we're listening to our favorite band rocking down the road, that's what it sounds like. I don't know what it sounded like in the studio, but for most of us, that's what it sounded like. And, when things went digital and we got CDs and then we got better headphones, and then we, the headphone craze came back with big headphones, and, even like earbuds, like my AirPods sound remarkably good considering it's this teeny tiny little wireless thing in my head. And, sampling, got so much better. We could do. How much of the expectations of audiences have been colored by, one, technology improving, but two, technology also putting the freaking DJ curve into every playback device known to man, because everything is sizzly highs and extra lows, sizzly highs and extra lows, like typical consumer stuff.
But Brian,
that's how people think an EQ works.
I don't really
Smiley.
believe the audience is dictating the sound that much. They're not writing in and going, "Hey, I'm not going to come back and see your show until you change the balance of the bass versus the top." I believe that's all dictated by the engineers and by the musical director, by the band themselves. That's what they want. The management, these are the people that decide that's the sound I'm going for. I don't know that an audience member would go, "I didn't like the show because there was too much bass." Well, they might, but that's not going to make them not come back. I don't think that sells tickets. That's just my opinion. I don't really
I think
know.
the audience does actually. They don't have to decide, but I mean, so many mixers have done interviews and written about trying to get over the screaming teenage in their crowd, and so then back to
but that's a different thing.
Hold on, let me finish. Going back to Greg's initial thing with sub bass and old school versus new school, So these mixers of pop music specifically and modern rock bands. So we're really talking about pop rock, maybe R&B, but really we're talking about pop rock. And in those situations, the mixers have to find ways to make it perceive louder without actually going over damaging limits, actual damaging limits. And so, I think most modern mixers will use sub bass, and the usual tilt is 20 dB louder than the rest of the spectrum to achieve the excitement over the screaming crowd. And I think that's really, and the technology gets us there, which brings me to Greg's thing of old school versus new school, which is that to say we can't achieve anything modern in the old school fashion, and people try. And one of the things I wrote down was, I'm seeing all these pictures of analog consoles these days, but all of the inserts are digital processing. So what is the analog mixer really doing, except for maybe the ego for the band and the front of house mixer themselves? In the end, there's one band out there, they're even using a digital processor as a summing matrix. So you can't even argue the summing matrix in the analog mixer then at that point. So, I think you have to apply old school theories to the new school tools. And I think Aram said it with the technology getting in the way of what you want to achieve. We can blame, the first plug-in console for that, for live, because we had uneducated mixers trying to use software that they don't understand what it's actually doing to their signal chain. And we saw the same thing with line array systems. How many mixers were scared to mix on that first line array system that came out in the late 90s because it got quote unquote too loud? And so, they didn't know how to control their
or it was too accurate. I mean, I remember now this is, everybody will poo-poo it, but the very first line array that I ever mixed on was an EAW 860 rig, which when processed correctly for its time was a good sounding box system. And the thing that became scary about it is the consistency of frequency response across the audience meant way more people can hear exactly what I'm doing. I'm not driving this sloppy front end 1966 Ford pickup truck down the road. Suddenly now I'm in a freaking, F1 race car, and now I actually need to be able to drive. And, it can also take your head off. But I think the big thing for me was, wow, it's going to sound like what I put into it, which is a whole different thing. I think the whether the audience dictates what it sounds like, I think it's a feedback loop. I think that, audience tastes dictate what the musicians and the producers produce, which colors audience tastes, I don't think that's any different than it's always been in recorded music, or for that matter, pre-recorded, even Beethoven days or whatever. There's a feedback loop in there that I think colors it. Clive?
I disagree.
That's the point. So it's good.
I think it's all about money, frankly. And I think producers and mixers and mastering engineers are looking to try and produce something that has that little bit of extra level so it pops on a playback system, whether it's the radio or a stream or anything else. And they're also looking for any kind of different kind of sound they can apply, whether it makes sense or not, whether it's musical or not, it doesn't matter. Just something to distinguish your product. And I think, in terms of the live thing, I agree with Jeff that sometimes louder is an easy way out. Or the other thing that I hear, especially at festivals, is people start their mix way too loud, and then they've got nowhere to go but louder, right? The last thing is for Scott Vogel, wherever he is, he's gone off.
He's moved. He's,
Oh
he's,
no,
he's
there,
still there.
Scott. Yeah, Scott. The mixer for Leonard Cohen was Mark Vrieken, and Mark lives in Toronto, and he's a very excellent mixer.
Yeah, his was when I heard his mix, I was like, okay, I need to try and get to that level of.
He did a ton of stuff actually on those tours, even down to carrying reinforced sound deadened drapes to put on the back of the PA to minimize went back on the stage. And, oh yeah, total attention to detail. Pretty darn good engineer.
Which weirdly enough, attention to the detail helps. Michael, you first, and I'll go to Fred.
I was just going to point out that a lot of it is also now becoming dictated by people in their phones, because they'll start posting, you know, on social media that where they're sitting, and they'll record it on their phone. And the next thing you know, you've got production manager or somebody like that running up to you going, hey, the people up there, you know, they can't hear. It's you need to, and it's not something that you can wait and fix tomorrow on the next show. They want it fixed RFN, and you know, no buts about it. You know, you're trying to concentrate on the show, and they want you to concentrate on, you know, section 247 of the nosebleed because there's a guy recording it on Facebook.
Yeah, I get people recording my shows all the time on phones and often sending it to the artist.
Yeah.
Oh boy.
Yeah, and it's the worst. It's the worst expanded version of the old board tape problem, where, you know, you would make a board tape and then God forbid the band ever heard it, and they would be like, "That's what it sounds like," and you're like, "No, it's the board tape. Board tapes doesn't sound like anything like what's coming out of the PA. A whole different thing." Fred.
I had two things for Pete as far as why I think you're seeing a lot of analog desks out there. It's the only thing you can get right now, supply chain. Second thing, I think it's possible that people don't quite understand how latency works, and they think that they're maybe getting less latency in a live situation by using an analog desk.
I do know one act that does it because of latency, but they recently converted over to SD7s. But the other ones, they're not using new consoles. These are consoles that have been around for a long time. So
right, because probably like I said, because they can't get new consoles. Nobody's selling them right now.
Yeah, and it's flex.
I don't think that's it. No.
Yeah. And it's flex.
The guy from Green Day's got his Neve or something like that.
That's a flex.
Why is that? That was at Lollapalooza. Why is that out?
That's just because he can.
Because he can.
Like that's
somebody else is lifting it.
To be, you know, I think it's silly, but I also can't, in all honesty, say that if I were in the same position, I wouldn't do something similar just because I could. You know, I'm not some monument to justice. Like, you know, if I really wanted to twist my Neve knobs and I had the wherewithal to put that on the road with me, I might do the same thing.
Yeah, with a straight up rock band that you don't need much.
Yeah, or a rock band. Now, if to kind of give an interesting side topic on this, I had actually spoke with Dave Ratt about a similar topic, because I'm like, Dave, why did you tour with that XL4 with the Chili Peppers in 2016? And I said in a very respectful way, are you afraid of using tech? But then he's like, no, and Dave's a very tech conscious like guy. And he said it had nothing to do with technology. It had to do with the interface. He liked how the XL4 felt when he adjusted everything. He said if they could make a digital version of that, he would use it, but none of the digital boards perform the way he likes to mix. So I think it's one on that. And also, I could be wrong on this. This is my assumption. Most of the bands I've seen that come up with that are like, they come with the analog board are either legacy or going to be legacy. And I consider legacy, you know, like your classic rock bands, or Green Day's in that weird one. But it's very, I've never seen someone my age that had that choice to come with an analog board. I think it's also what we grew up with. They're comfortable. The mixer, I hate to keep poking on them, but like the guy who mixes Green Day, I'm sure he's really comfortable with that Neve board or however it's all set up. So I think that's it. And to kind of someone had brought up something about, I think it was Brian, and I forget who else we're talking about, like when we transitioned to line arrays. A similar thing happened, and it's a specific one, with the LS9. I never got why people kept saying the LS9 sounds like garbage, because I've mixed on the LS9 and I've gotten a good sound out of it. Now, would it have won any awards at the Grammys? No. But for the shows I did, it sounded really good, until I later found out someone did research on that. And the reason why I kept getting the bad sound was people were gain staging it as though it was an analog board. If you know anything about digital clipping sounds like garbage. So they were putting it into the red when they needed to more put it into the yellow. If you put that board into the yellow, it sounds fine. So I think that's also the thing to always be aware of when we're doing these kind of talks is, are people using it the way it's supposed to be used, or are they trying to use it the way they think it should be used?
I don't know. Analog is still cooler. I will say I had a conversation with Michael Lawrence on Signal Noise podcast. Anyway, and we were talking. We both referenced to cut to the chase of the story. Unbeknownst to each other, he referenced something about, we were talking about a Paragon, and he said, I just heard the greatest mix I've ever heard, like top 3 mixes I've ever heard in my life, and it was on this Paragon. I said, it's a funny thing. It's like, one of the top 3 mixes I've ever heard in my life was on a Paragon, but it was 25 years ago. And it was Martina McBride. I did a thing in DC, and Martina was one of the headliners along with Reba McEntire. And I had nothing to do with the show sound. I actually called the show as a show caller. So, I got to just sit back and listen to it. And it was one of the best shows I've ever heard in my life. And of course, Michael came back with, funny story. The thing I just heard 3 days ago was Martina McBride on the exact same console with John McBride mixing. It's like, there's something to be said for familiar tools, a ton of skill, familiar artist. I'm sure John McBride could pull together a stellar mix on anything you put in front of him. He's got plenty of talent, but he's mixed Martina on that same like serial number 7 or something, first generation P40 Paragon. And I don't know how many times it's been recapped or how much maintenance has been done on it, but
preamps on it don't work anymore. So you got, I forget what
he uses a different set of preamps. He uses the APIs rack full. He only uses the faders on the Paragon. The rest of it's all done in the rack.
But that brings up another point. That camp, that they're such a functional camp of people, and it's a it's a true road family. Like I've known some of the people that have gone out of that group, and like there'll be songs where the monitor engineer is playing piano, and it's so that vibe does translate to the audience, and clearly,
Yeah, and I mean we're kind of rambling all over the place around the topic, which is fine. That's kind of the point of what we do. But it's to me it's still interesting to consider, how much the tools affect the outcome, how much the search for the right outcome affect the tools, et cetera, et cetera. Mac, talk to us, because I think you're the only one who hasn't chimed in yet, and so
I think Scott Holtzman hasn't spoken either.
Oh, okay, yep, and also Scott. Okay, cool.
And Mike Fortin. I don't think I've heard him yet.
Also true. And Mac is probably like, I don't care about the kick drum. I do corporate. Like, why do I care? I do broadcast.
Exactly.
Like, leave me alone. Why are you calling on me, Maddox?
I think the great move in low end was not so much kick drum, because I don't really think a kick drum has that much. It's the synthesizers. I think what really makes all that low end exciting is like in EDM, a big drop where, it really goes down. And I find that kind of exciting, but the kick drum smashing me, not so much. It's overdone. As the snare was, 30 years ago.
Actually, you make a really good point, because it's like, some of us with a little bit more gray hair remember, like, the gated reverb snare was king, and that was the first thing you got right on the record, and then that was the first thing you got right live. It was like, okay, hit the snare drum, and it would just be like, freaking 15 minutes of them smacking the snare while you dialed in your SPX 900 to just the right amount of gate and just the right amount of whatever. And it was a snare drum solo with a band around it. Like, it's a good, thanks for reminding me, because I kind of forgotten, but that happened. That was a thing. It was a flavor. It was a thing.
And
Scott H. Sorry to cut you off. Other Scott H. Holtzman. Comment. Bring something to the table. Tell us things.
I don't have a lot to bring, being out of the loop here from for the past 60 days, but on the mend. Hope to get back to work soon, but it's tough. Anyway, you mentioned something that struck me. You mentioned the playback systems and kind of just glossed over it, that the stereos that we had in the late 70s and 80s of our youth didn't have a capable low end. Even the car stereo stuff at that time was not spectacular. Today, most factory systems, when I rent cars and my wife's car, I was stunned at how much low end it is tuned that way too. So I think that there's a certain expectation of it. But more important, you mentioned the triggers. So the band hears what the studio engineers do, and they have an infinite amount of time to adjust put their virtual stack of 80 effects on and get just the right kick sound that they're looking for out of that artist. And then that artist comes to you, whether you're with them or whether you're just a visiting engineer, and they're like, well, we just want it to sound like it does on the record. And live, that sometimes can be a pretty big challenge. A lot of people bring misconfigured synthesizers, as you said, and their triggers aren't set right, and the whole rig's not set right, and it just sounds awful. And you can't tell them it sounds awful, because they're going to tell you that the 80 guys before you did it perfect, and you're sitting here telling me you can't do it. And I never know how to respond in that situation. So I think that some of it grew out of that, but a few people made the comments that it's a new thing. I mean, I remember listening to Ministry in the mid 80s, which was early EDM, and they had incredible low end in it. So I don't think it's new, but it's moved into genres we wouldn't expect, like modern country, as you said, the Jason Aldean sound and everything. And I'll finish up with one of the funniest things that ever happened. We were at a festival. It was hot. We'd been there all day, and I had stopped really listening to the bands and was just we brought the PA, and I was just there to make sure nobody blew it up. That was my job, and make sure everybody's consoles were plugged in right. But one of the guys from the sound company that hired us to bring the line array, like I said, didn't pay any attention, but it was a Beatles cover act. And about 10 minutes into the sound check, I got to keep it clean for the crowd, as you said. The leader of the band, whether it was a guitar player or whatever, comes up to the front and shouts and Willie was the guy mixing, and he says, "We are not effing Cinderella. We are covering the Beatles. Get that bass drum sounding like it's supposed to sound." And he was pissed. He said, "You should know what the Beatles sound like. You're not a kid." And I just found that, you have to be genre specific, and we've talked about that before. So.
I tell you what I think would be, things that aren't possible for 100, Alex. But if you could take the Beatles when they were 25 and suddenly have them make records now, I wonder what they would do. It's an impossible thought experiment, but you just completely differently shaped by the music around them, completely differently shaped by the technology available, completely shaped by all of these external factors, exact same people, exact same age, exact same talent level, exact same relationships. But what would the output look like, Jeff?
So much of their creativity was driven by their limitations in technology. And would they have been as creative without those limitations.
Yeah, or exactly, or I mean, I know one of the problems that I have that actually limits me creatively as a musician is now I have too many options, and then I very quickly can find myself paralyzed. Well, I don't know which one to do now. Like I'm recording stuff now, but I'm literally looking for somebody to just take it over and produce it for me and make the decisions because it's too many options. Like it's that whole study that they did where if you give somebody 12 options, they're paralyzed. If you give them 3 options, they're happier, because then they can just pick the one that they want and they like what they got. We're getting short on time, but Mike Horton, we haven't heard from you, even though it looks like you are coming to us from the X-Files. Yeah, that's nice.
I'm
that's
traveling. I'm in Georgia right now. So yeah,
nothing good happens in Georgia. I'm sorry.
No. My comment would be, I wonder if in the old day or older times when I was young, technicians focused more on the mix and getting a good mix, as opposed to now, like you were just saying, there were so many options, so much technology, plugins and all kinds of things built into every channel on the board. And I think that may be part of the problem nowadays. Instead of just focusing on, the mix being right and appropriate to the genre.
Well, and
the
I do
idea
think
of playing with plugins and things, right?
Yeah, well, and again, too many options, and it's too easy to just pile more stuff on. But that's a whole nother show. I don't have a great wrap up, so I'm just going to tell this one little fun thing that I found out just recently that tied off of Scott's comment about triggers, although I do think it's related. So I've always been fascinated by Rick Allen's drum kit. Rick Allen from Def Leppard. And you just kind of wanted to know the particulars about it. So I went down a rabbit hole about, 4 or 5 days ago when I couldn't sleep and found the drum tech who has a channel that tells you all about Rick Allen's drum kit. And it's 90% electronic. And for anybody who doesn't know what I'm talking about, Rick Allen is the one-armed drummer for Def Leppard. Okay, plays pretty much electronic kit. Plays lots and lots of stuff with his left foot. It's a unique drum. It's a unique kind of setup. But the thing that really was interesting to me that I took away, because of course Mutt Lange is the infamous producer who made the ridiculously huge Def Leppard records with drums that were as big as a house and vocals that were bigger than a house, and everything was freaking enormous, which was probably some of the start of some of this new different kind of approach, you could argue. But interesting little tidbit from his rig is Rick Allen doesn't listen to those sounds when he plays because they're too big and they're too obnoxious, and it's hard to actually play the drums when that's the sounds that are in your headphones. So every single trigger triggers 2 different samples, and there's a set of samples that he listens to that are much clearer and much more open. In fact, the drum tech says actually the drums he listens to don't sound good to me at all. And meanwhile, on every song, there's a different set of samples the front of house guy is getting for the impact for the audience, which I just thought was an interesting kind of thing of, coloring the sounds that you're using specifically for the audience response that aren't even musical to the artists themselves, but you're coloring it for this. It was just an interesting little thing. But anyway, thanks to Greg for the topic. We touched on a bunch of different things. I'm not sure when the Audio Opinion Show will be back, but hopefully we'll be back soon. I want to thank everybody for joining us here. If you want to get involved in the Audio Opinion Show, just click on the little email link in the description, or just send up a flare. I don't know. I don't even know when we're doing the show. I run it and I don't even know when we're doing it. So whatever.
Can the next topic be how much Brian changes the rules
Hey man, it's you know, it's good to be king. I don't know what else to say. But anyway, thanks to all for being here. Thanks for anybody who listened. If you're here live, I want to thank both of you. And with that, I think Mr. Broughton, roll
Shall we run
that
it?
fabulous bean footage.
Okay. Find it here. Let's try this. There we go.
I'll go for it. I don't need to hear a whole resume. I've been on before, so
Bye bye, boys.
Have fun storming the castle.
Think it'll work?
It'll take a miracle.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.